Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Kate Hurley, Chief Information Officer, Madison International Realty. We're really excited to have Kate and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Beyond Tech, the Changing Face of IT Leadership. Welcome, Kate. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And I'd like to introduce the panel first. Patrick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. I'm honored to be here too. My name's Pat Benoit. I'm the global CISO at Brinks. Prior experience is running GRC and BSO with CBRE and customer delivery exec at Dell Services and at Experian, and so been around the block a few times and happy to be here.
Another CBRE alum. I did my 19 years there too. John,
Nice.
how about you?
Hi, good morning. My name is John Arsenault. I'm the Chief Information Officer of Goulston & Stores, which is a law firm headquartered in Boston. I spent about 20 years in tech startups prior to getting into the legal industry. So quite a change in venues, so to speak, and happy to be here.
That's so exciting. Startup world. Kevin?
Yes, ma'am. Kevin Peck. I'm a CIO with the U.S. Army. I've been in the Army for about 36 years, getting ready to retire and move into the public sector. And so currently running around in Asia and Europe doing electronic medical record installations of Cerner worldwide for Defense Health Agency. Happy to be here.
Hey, Kevin, hooah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your service as a Navy brat. I appreciate very much what you've done for us. So, and
Yes,
thank you all for being here. This is an exciting time to be in the world of technology, no matter where you're in the world of technology. And so one of the first things I want to ask, a wide open question to the group, how are you managing to balance the day-to-day, which is increasing constantly, alongside innovation, and ensure that quality work is being done while you're fostering the ability of yourself and your teams to embrace so many new technologies as they come to the fore?
Great. I'll jump in if you don't mind, Kate. I tend to be a little bit pragmatic and process oriented in the things that we do. So the way I teach my team to look at innovation or process improvement, if you will, is kind of the start from the top. I make it that my senior most people, senior most engineers, senior most analysts have a responsibility at that level, at that tier 3, tier 4 level, to be give an eye to what's going on in the process. Where are there points of friction that we can remove? Where are there opportunities for new technologies that might help us automate or help us improve and reduce those touch points, always with an eye towards our customers, both our little c customer and our big C customer. And their responsibility then is to help identify those areas and come up with solutions. Once we have the solution and we start to put it in place, then my next level of engineers and analysts have the responsibility for kind of implementing and proving out the concept, documenting what they're doing. How does this improvement play out? What's the procedure? And then finally, they push that down to where it becomes a much more rote kind of level 1 task to my most junior people to execute And all during that process, we're looking for ways to automate and then pull it off tier one. And then we just cycle through that again and again and again.
Okay, so in the very old days when I was coming up, we would have called that iterative excellence, and it would have been part of the
Exactly.
TQL cycle. All right, I love it. I love it. That's home to me. And throughout the organization, you can really employ that same cycle and back it with technology, so it scales. That's great. What
Yeah.
about John, Kevin?
Yeah, I can sort of build on that. I think, trying to balance day-to-day operations with innovation, it really comes down to tactical planning. You have to actually allocate people's time to do this stuff, right? Otherwise, they're left with trying to do it on top of everything else, and it falls to the wayside. So one of the things we've done is built in sort of from our PMO standpoint, metrics on professional development. And so some of that, depending on the role, can mean training. Some of it can mean attending conferences. Some of it can mean building relationships externally outside of the organization with either peers or people even outside of the industry that you operate in. And I think you have to set that expectation that that's part of the gig. It's not a nice to have. It's not do it if you want. In order for organizations, I think, to keep up with this stuff, you need as much sort of eyes on the newer stuff that's out there. And I think if you just leave it to chance, it generally doesn't happen.
That's probably astute in a lot of ways. What gets measured is what gets done. So measure it. See where you're at. Did you have that first year of measuring that gave you a baseline and then you developed a metric off of that?
Yeah, we started in sort of the basics, which was just trying to figure out how much time we were allocating to initiatives, to, day-to-day operations or what we call BAU. And then you can see the stressors on different individuals depending on what their skill sets are. Some people are overburdened, some people are underburdened. You run initiatives to drive efficiency into groups, and you can claw back people's time if you do that successfully. So for us, it was just setting the stage of being able to understand how people were spending their time, and then how do we inject this stuff as priorities.
Sounds- Kevin, you
So
want to chime
yeah,
in?
no, I was going to add on. So for us, the iterative change or transformation is almost a force function because the organization. So I've never been in a CIO job more than 2 to 3 years because the Army then moves me someplace else, whether it's overseas in Europe or Asia or somewhere in the States. And so typically what we do is we take 90 days and review everything that we're doing internal to the staff and the organization, and then also to our external customers, and see where there's some efficiencies that we can pick up. A lot of times, I will tell you, as I move through organizations, that's it, and it was just alluded to a minute ago, that's actually in the people space. I know we're talking about technology and innovation, but we have a lot of older employees that have been with the organization 10, 20, 30 years. And there's a need to identify those that can be retrained and upscaled, whether that's through professional conferences and certifications, or if it's through um, changing their skill set completely and maybe moving them into the cyber workforce vice where they used to be in a sysadmin area. And so the other piece of that for us is we have to beg for the budget. So there's a very restricted and very minute budget in the big picture, I will tell you, for IT on the inside of DoD at this point, unless you're in cyber. And so I have to go out and find opportunities that I can go in and show an ROI for what I'm getting ready to do. So, i.e., my logistics systems having issues maintaining property accountability as I ship it worldwide to well over 200 sites, and so I go out and I find an RFID solution that allows me to track that. It's a very cheap cost upfront, and it has a very large ROI on the back end. And then part of that agreement I have with the enterprise is I get a piece of that pie. to redo things internally, whether I need to rebuild a data center or something along those lines. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Hey,
That's really,
Kate,
yeah.
I wanted to throw out there on there because it kind of ties into Kevin talking about the different roles and how you can shift it. I think oftentimes we restrict a lot of our innovative view and thinking to what we see in business and what we do in the workplace, either the current workplace or where we've been. So we see a lot of that going on. But we don't necessarily always encourage people to think about things that they're doing that are not business, that are part of their personal life, that are, and I'll use the example of I'm a commercial pilot and flight instructor. So, bringing the idea of checklists, be it emergency and abnormal normal checklists into the processes is something that's outside, directly the normal business flow. So my deputy CISO, he's been a luthier for 35 years. So he creates and builds and hand makes musical instruments. There are things there that could be innovative that we could bring into business. So we have to think outside of our normal workplace.
It's so funny that you say that because I come to IT from such a strange background. I was an English major, and my joke has always been that I fell into IT because I learned how to read the directions in college, and no one else was willing to at the time. But you bring these odd little skills from all these other places you go in your life, and I think that's one of the reasons that we need to encourage diversity in our fields because the more different brains we have, the better that collection of oddities becomes, the more strong we are as a big group. So I love what you're saying.
Well,
Yeah.
and if I may just play off of it one more time, and so you have to set up a reward system. We all talk about innovations. We all need to do it. There are 1,800 technical solutions to every problem we have, and 150 of them probably fit our organization at the price point we want it. But if we don't encourage our people to go out and look for those and make it very clear to them that they're allowed to fail, because we're encouraging them to find efficiencies, then we're hamstringing ourselves from the get go. I joke around with my staff a lot. I want to be the least intelligent person in the room. And the reason that I say that, because I see this a lot inside and outside of government right now. There's a lot of leaders that don't ever want to be wrong. And so there's a reason that I'm paying a lot of money to my staff for the organization to do what they do and do what they do well and get better at it. And so I want them to be smarter than me in their area. I have to be intelligent enough to be dangerous, read the directions, as you say, but I need to resource them, remove barriers, and get out of the way and let them do what they're there to do and what I'm paying them to do.
Absolutely. So we've started to have some questions flow in, and I know there are people answering them in the chat, which is fantastic. But I want to draw attention to them because it resonates with some of the things you guys are saying. As far as leadership skills and knowledge base that are unique to IT, is there anything that you think is going to change about those in the future? Say in the horizon of 3 years, do you see leadership skills or base knowledge that IT leaders are going to have to acquire that they haven't had to acquire in the past?
Yeah, so I view leadership skills as relatively universal and timeless. Now there will be filling in the gaps on adjusting ways that may be better to manage and lead certain things. But the real thing that changes and that's always unique from my point of view is the people that are part of the team that you're leading. And that diversity, as you mentioned early, is what makes the biggest leadership skill in my mind to be the adaptability of the leader, the ability to read the team and understand what is needed to get the most from that team. But those basic leadership skills, in my mind, are universal and timeless.
Anybody
Yeah,
else?
I think I would add to that there's been this evolution really over the last decade from sort of a technology first, business second approach. And I think that's completely flipped now. And CIOs are sort of these pseudo CEOs in a way. You really have to understand every business unit to serve them and to help them with the evolution of what technology brings to the table. It used to be that you could just understand the technology and you'd build all that stuff in the back room and you'd have a trainer show up to somebody's office and show them how to use the latest software. That doesn't work at all today. It's a world that's completely enveloped by tech. Everything that people do depends on it. And I think you have to be in a position where you understand the business at a detailed level. And obviously, a CIO in an organization of any size can't be the only person that does that. So you have to really push the folks that have operational responsibility to start thinking about how to understand what it is that they're involved with at a high level.
So what I would add is I think that what I see in the industry is we need to go back and revisit our soft skills because, as was just mentioned, we become very, very, very technology driven. Everybody's got a device in their hand. Everybody's texting. Everybody can, reach out and see what's in the refrigerator because there's cameras that show what's in your refrigerator, et cetera. And we lost that face-to-face piece of it where we're looking somebody in the eye and we can tell whether or not they're happy about being at work today, if something's stressing them out, et cetera. And so I think to get the best out of your people, as has been mentioned, you have to know what's going on with them. And then the other piece is you gotta train them and build them. Some people are born leaders. Some people aren't, but have the ability. And that's finding those professional organizations. So for like me, I'm in healthcare. It's the College of Healthcare Information Management Executives. And they have a very structured system that allows you to take a junior individual that's a director, et cetera, and move them up through the system and give them peers throughout the industry and other industries to learn from and lean on to build those skill sets so that they can bring those back in-house to lead their teams to meet the organization's, mission and objectives.
There has been one major shift in leadership that's really obvious, I think, that's an evolutionary shift. And that is this concept. And I know Kevin can appreciate this being in the military because I was there too. This idea of command and control type leadership versus trust and inspire type leadership. And there's a place for command and control still, battlefield, emergency response, there's time and place where you just have to say, go do it and get it done. But by and large, our leadership now has to be more of a build a two-way trust because you can't have trust one way only. So you have to be trustworthy and you have to give trust out and then inspire those people you're leading to do what needs to get done. So I think that's an evolutionary shift in leadership.
Agreed. And there's, as you guys said, there's command and control leaders changing and growing is something that's still in progress. So we may have a few more years of getting people there, finding the right space for them to be confident. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit so we can talk about some of the newer technologies that are coming on stage. And we go back to my first question. We talked about how we're handling leadership. We talked a little bit about its people, process, technology, and so it's a philosophical approach to how we're handling our foundational CIO roles. But there is a lot of emerging tech that has a lot of implications. And everybody's asking about AI, obviously, in our Q&A here. But AI is not the only thing out there. We've got augmented reality, we've got machine learning, which tends to get lumped in with the AI conversation, but is a different and bestial of its own. There's a lot going on. So Kevin, I actually want to start with you if you're available to lead off on this question, because people are curious about how the military in particular, if you can speak to this, is handling the security questions around artificial intelligence.
So I can speak of it in general. So first of all, we set up Cyber Command. That's a separate command completely from the signal command that handles all of our satellite communications, etc. And then the second thing we've done is we've set up a couple of think tanks, for lack of a better way to say it, that looks at all the apps that may or may not benefit us. That is a part of that process. There's a very rigorous cyber piece to it. So if you talk to me 8 to 10 years ago as a CIO in the military, I was ridiculously frustrated because I would get systems that somebody bought, especially in the healthcare space, that the truth is it was the best piece of equipment available and that it had the ability to save lives, probably better than the previous generation of equipment that we had. The problem was nobody had considered the cyber side when it came to contracting, when it came to the clinical staff, when it came, because it wasn't integrated into the organization's acquisitions process. Over the last 6 to 7 years, we've slowly, and we're almost there, we're not there yet, at least in my opinion, we've gotten to the point where now when you go out to look at a new technology, you have to run it through the IT department, and more specifically the cyber side of the house, to have them sign off on it to make sure that I can safely integrate it into the network. As soon as I purchase it, Vice is sitting on a dock for 15 months while I complete the cyber portion of it. I've been doing that internally to my organizations for years, and it's worked very well. So the only other thing I would add before the guys jump in is that you have to form strategic partnerships outside of your organization. I work in one of the largest organizations and most diverse organizations in the world and the world's ever seen. And that being said, I guarantee you we don't have all the skill sets and the expertise that we need to figure out which AI we need or which machine learning or what partner or vendor is going to provide that to us. And so that comes back to the strategic partnership, where I reach out to one of the team members that are on the panel today and say, hey, what are you all doing in the legal space on this? Or what are you doing over here on the security side? And that's why those professional conferences and affiliations that I talked about earlier are so important.
Absolutely.
One thing I'd add, sort of taking this in a little bit different direction. So historically, the technology leadership team has been trying to pull the other folks in the company along from an evolution standpoint, adoption of new tech. And AI more recently has kind of seen a complete flip of that, right? So now we're seeing we're in a world where the most valuable companies are all tech companies. The richest people are all tech founders. And the quote unquote hype cycle is pretty endless around whatever the emerging thing of the day is, right? 2 years ago, everything was going to be on blockchain. Last year, we were all going to live in the metaverse, and now AI is going to take over the world. And there's some truth to each of those things. But for the first time, I'm seeing folks in the business come to me proactively, some excited about the prospects of AI and some panicked about what it's going to do to their business. So it's a pretty interesting flipping of roles.
What do you attribute that to, John?
I think people are just a lot more aware of the impact the technology today has on everything. Even folks that are quote unquote not all that technical or aren't really into early adoption, people that sort of still kick and scream to stay away from whatever the latest changes, even they're aware that this stuff is changing the world on a daily basis. And so I think AI, I think partly because of the moniker AI, but also because of the things that they're seeing in the press,
Yeah.
is leading people to be pretty nervous about what this means to, longstanding successful businesses.
Yep. Would you rate your ratio of nervous people to non-nervous people as 50-50, 60-40?
In my industry, in legal, it's a pretty heads down, client focused type industry. And I don't know what the exact ratio is, but there are certainly more people that are nervous about the impact of this than I've seen with any other tech.
Same experience. That's why I'm curious. And I am attributing part of it to the pandemic. That, yeah, Patrick, what's your experience?
I think some of the anxiety, or most of the anxiety that I'm seeing, centers around two significant issues with AI of any sort at this point is controlling data leakage and loss of data, and then bias in the results, bias and incorrect results. I just read an article recently that Mastercard is putting a bunch of focus on trying to take the bias out of use of AI for making credit decisions. Well, the way they're doing that is they're taking a page from old school, the old book that says, let's go back and form a governance council that brings everybody to the table to start discussing all of these things. But so a lot of that anxiety I'm seeing are in those two areas. And much of it that's overlooked is everybody's hyped on, oh, it's going to make things so much easier, but they're missing all of the ethical implications and the liability implications and all of those things. And the very fact that so far, no matter how hard anybody's tried, they have not been able to take inherent bias of the programming of the model out of the results. So that's where the anxiety is.
I think that's definitely anxiety at the level of you and I.
Yeah.
John and I may have been thinking of anxiety at a more normal end user level, people who are not as technically adept and able to have that conversation.
But I
Where
think there's two levels there. If you want to be that simple binary, is that there's the user that doesn't know any better and they're just using it and it helps them do what they need to do and they don't care. And
oh,
then there's the user that maybe thinks, I'm not quite sure if this is right or not.
with, and that user that I'm encountering is actually really scared, and they're more scared for
Yeah,
their job.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
because they can't conceptualize and they may conceptualize the bias issue at some level, but they feel that the robot overlords are coming. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the lack of understanding of the technology itself, and it's not obviously a simple technology to understand, but the complete lack of understanding is what's driving a lot of the fear. And it's very easy to conclude if you just read sort of headlines that your job's going to go away, which may or may not be the case at all. But that's sort of where people start the conversation, which is not a great jumping off point.
So just to add, I mean, the truth is AI is no different than what's come before.
Right.
We used to build cars a certain way, then Ford came along with the assembly line. We've always been, as a people, culture, or whatever you want to call it, in this process. The difference now is it happens in a year to 2 years instead of it being a 20 to 25-year process where that industry shrinks to just 10% of the size of the workforce that it used to be. And so that anxiety that you're talking about, I think, is right there, which again, I think goes back to, you have to invest in your people, identify the people that can actually pick up that new skill set and leverage it ethically, and with governance for the organization, while at the same time identifying those people that can't and figure out what else they can do for the organization. And then there's also the truth that sometimes that's just not available. And
But
so it's time for them to move on to, retirement or a different organization or whatnot, because your organization and the technology or the mission of the organization has just outgrown them.
and we try to
And
support each other in those
yep,
situations and be helpful and caring as we can. Exactly.
And we
yep.
just saw a very similar kind of movement in the last, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, in that when cloud and cloud infrastructure as a service became a big deal, all of the system engineers out there, the system admins, became all worried about their jobs because they no longer have a piece of equipment to manage all of the time. And so what the people that were the most successful with their teams were the ones that immediately started helping them retrain to be PowerShell developers and such like that, because that's what we really needed now. Not somebody to go press the button on the machine, but somebody to develop scripting to automate tasks and make things better. And so by retraining and the leaders that saw that vision, those are the ones that had the least turnover of people.
And I would add, you have to really go back and look at the composition of your workforce at this point. How many are actually permanent members of the organization? So for me, it's government services, and then how many are going to be contract? How much of it am I going to outsource? And I will tell you, at least from my perspective on the IT side, that has flipped for me pretty significantly over the last, I'd say, 10 years. And so before, I would have wanted 60 to 70% of my workforce being permanent employees that were a part of the organization. But because the technology is changing so quickly, and it's so expensive to keep those really high-end skill sets certifications up, plus give them time to go away to maintain their certifications on CEUs, conferences, testing, etc. It's actually cheaper for the organization and a better result, at least I've found, if you have more of a 60-40 or 70-30 split of contractors versus your permanent staff. And your permanent staff is the staff that is in charge, is still accountable, responsible, but also understands the organization, the mission of the organization, the culture of the organization, so they can maintain that stability as you switch contracts out. Because the nice thing about a contract is when I don't need it, it's gone. But I'm not affecting the people that are on that contract because they're simply going to move to a different contract vehicle or mission and continue in their career path with that company. So I think that's something you have to look at nowadays too, with the way that technology is just exploding.
And technology-wise, we created some of our own problem because we developed best-in-breed point solutionitis. And so we started wanting the best-in-breed for every 1% solution out there, and startups just blew off the map. It's even worse in cyber, that everybody has a 1% solution. And we can't afford, most of us, to have people that are one-trick ponies, can only do one thing. Until you're a 60, 80, $100 billion company, maybe you can start diversifying like that. But otherwise, you can't afford that. So now we're seeing the pendulum swing back to platform solutions again. We're seeing consolidation of these point solutions, which is going to make our life easier in terms of talent.
You should also maybe encourage your people, I don't know, be the sysadmin, but also be the PowerShell developer. And also while you're at it, go get some other certs and be the generalist the world needs at different points.
Yes.
So we've just got a couple of minutes left. John, was there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't quite get to? We were all over the board today.
Nothing really jumps out. I'd actually just add that I couldn't agree more about the point solutions. And the industry that I work in, legal, has been really just sort of devastated, I think, by that. For the last 20 years, there's been all these boutique shops that show up and they write a piece of software that does one thing. And it's not wasn't a very competitive landscape in legal tech. So all these firms would adopt these applications, and there'd be a firm of 1,000 people that have 500 different applications, and it becomes unmanageable. And when you think about the evolution of emerging tech, whether you're talking about AI or anything else, it's very hard to get to that when your cost center basis is just running all of this historic stuff that nobody wants to let go of. And so we've been moving pretty aggressively in the past 5 to 7 years towards SaaS solutions. And we really like to partner with companies that have a vision beyond the sort of one-trick pony that Patrick was mentioning.
I think that's brilliant. Patrick, Kevin, what other mistakes have you seen people make, missteps, particularly in IT leadership, when you're trying to adapt to industry changes and maintain competitive advantage?
I've seen two primarily. One has been mitigated a little bit because of the pandemic. We did a lot less traveling, so there was a lot less reading of airline magazines and Wall Street journals in the airline. So we weren't getting quite as many executives raising their hand saying, "Hey, this company's doing X and it's cool," and so they were driving us to chase shiny objects just without any real plan. So I think that's diminished some. I think the other is, as executives move, and there tends to be a lot of movement still in the CIO arena, especially, that there's a tendency I have seen for new CIO to come in and be willing to be trying to make a mark. And so everything they hear from business, little c and big C customers, they take it and assume it's correct and assume that the IT organization was not doing it correct. And then everybody scrambles around to try and figure out what happened and what's the real truth. And you get the real truth to the CIO, but the damage kind of has already been done because you've demoralized the team. You've set the expectation that whatever somebody out there that knows nothing about what's happening tells you something, that you're going to listen to it. And I've seen that as a bad trend.
That makes sense. Kevin?
So I would say, and I've seen this not just inside of DoD, but because of the organizations I'm affiliated with, I've seen it on the outside also. Is I think the biggest mistake a lot of organizations make is the CIO is not in the boardroom. They were the guy or the girl that was in the back office that kept everything running. The phones are still on. I can still log into my computer and get to my email. And when I travel, it works. Right? But they weren't sitting at the table, and still aren't in a lot of organizations, as a strategic partner that's looking at the long-term goals of the organization, the budget, being a part of that process. And because of that, going back to what was just said, a lot of times there's board members that are talking to another entity or looking in a magazine, and they bring something back. And because the CIO really doesn't understand what the board is talking about and what the 3 and 5 year goals and mission are, then they execute instead of having a voice at the table says, wait a minute, let's slow down, take a look at this, because you're trying to buy this system that integrates with nothing else that we currently have on the platform, which is going to force me now to then buy these 4 or 5 other solutions. And so I think that's the biggest thing. We have to get in the room, but at the same time, and I put it in chat earlier, is you have to find champions in your organization that are helping you find the right solution for the organization. So I'm not a doc. I'm not a nurse. I know a lot because I've been on the battlefield and things that I've done, but they're the experts. Now they want all the shiny objects, so I'll let them go look for the shiny objects, but then they bring them back to me and we have a discussion about, hey, here's the reality of the budget. Here's the reality of our mission. And then we whittle that down to 2 or 3, and then we really get serious about it.
I'm glad you brought it back to that. This is probably our last question, then we're gonna have to call it. But when you are talking about building those ambassadors, your technology team, your group of trusted advocates in an organization, whatever you want to call your crew, how do you set that up, your IT leaders in the organization? Are there any tips and tricks that you guys can share?
And one thing I'll share that we've done, I think some of it is just recognizing the right personality types for this. Not everybody's cut out to do it, but for those that are, and maybe they're new at it, you have to guide them on just how to reach out to people across the organization. Whether you're encouraging them to just schedule a meeting with some of their peers in other groups, or encouraging them to attend industry events to meet other folks, or even tell them to go grab lunch with somebody in the organization and learn about what that person does. It can really be that simple. You don't have to go there necessarily with an agenda, but just to get to know folks around the company.
That makes perfect sense. Patrick, anything?
I don't think I have anything off, besides what they've already shared. John and Kevin already shared. Those are all excellent points, and I think they're spot on.
All right, brilliant. Well, we've got 5 minutes until the end of the session. We can open it up for any last questions. I'll give you one from the chat. Are there any specific skills or qualities that are becoming essential for IT leaders to have? You want to kick it off, guys?
So the only thing I would go back to earlier, I'm going to have a very specific set of individuals within my team that have the cyber piece, and they're the experts. They're the ones with the certifications, and that's why I'm paying them to do what they do. However, I have to be competent at a high level, what they're looking at, what their challenges are, how I have to resource them. So I would say for CIOs, there has to be, whether it's simply certificates or actual certification, from a CISSP or CISM standpoint. I think we've gotten to the point where, depending on the size of the organization and the mission, we're putting ourselves at risk if we don't have some cyber certification expertise on our kit bag, even though I'm paying the experts to do it. Because whereas before, I might lose money or I might lose time and effort if we made a mistake because I didn't know enough about your area as an SA. In my field, if I don't know enough and we make a mistake, I can get a patient killed. And so it's very important for me to have that certification or at a certain level in the cyber side of the house. That's the only thing I'd add.
And I think there's a balance there too, though, because I have encountered both types of CIOs. Some CIOs that have wanted to front the CISO for all cyber matters. So they want the CISO to try to tell them the story and then let them try and communicate the story because they want to be the one talking to the LT or they want to be the one talking to the board. That sometimes gets lost in translation. And so I have spent time in the past walking back statements from CIOs that thought they, had good intention and thought they knew what they were talking about, but they were outside their realm. So I think there's a balance they have to take there. Getting a certification does not then make you the expert. The other thing I'd say is I say this to all aspiring CISOs all the time. Stop worrying about studying the technology. Yes, we have to keep naturally abreast of technology, but the benefit for the company is going to be when you study operations, sales, marketing, finance, customer relationship management, all of those things that make you a better business leader. CIOs have already started to take that step. They're already, starting to get the seat at the table and being at the table as business leaders. CISOs are 10 or 15 years behind in that evolution. And as long as we keep being the tech speak people, we're not going to make that transition. And that's what we need to do.
And then the only thing I'd add to that, because I know we're short on time, is we're all going to get hacked. We're all going to get attacked. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. So one thing that I see is a lot of organizations don't have a really solid plan that's been tested for recovery.
Right.
And so that's where I really think the CIO comes into play, going back to being in the boardroom and having a seat at the table and making sure that the organization is very aware that it's coming, but here's the plan if it happens.
Resiliency, definitely. I think that division of roles, CISO, CIO, CTO, definitely further conversation could be had there, but we are very short on time. I really want to thank everyone for being here. This was a fantastic conversation. It felt like it went very quickly. I'm going to wrap it up and toss it over to Nick here in just a moment. If there are any closing remarks from you guys, now's the moment to make them. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. It was really great to talk to you about the future of the CIO and emerging technologies across the industries. I really appreciate it. And it's over to you, Nick.
Great. Well, thank you all for such an insightful panel discussion. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.